you want to know how to hand quilt your quilt now that you've got the top made? I'm going to show you how to do it right here. This quilt is laid out now, ready for pinning together. Yesterday I drew lines on it that I'm going to quilt along. I'm actually going to just do a simple diamond pattern on this quilt. I wanted to use a table and not try to draw that out on the bed. Before I started drawing on this quilt, I folded it corner to corner and I pressed in these lines so that I would have a good guide as a beginning. And then my lines are 3 inches apart, and so I put my ruler on there at the 3 inch and marked down, and then I turned it around and I did the same in the opposite direction. What I used to mark this quilt was I used my favourite ceramic pen on the dark parts. The lines are quite faint, I'm not sure how well they'll show up for you. And on the light parts, I used an iron-off pen. And now a lot of people say that if you take your fabric into cold weather, that the iron marks will come back. Now, I have honestly never had that happen to me. But nevertheless, what I tried to do was not make very dense marks. So I'm sure that you can't see these because they're really just vague dotted lines across that I'm going to be able to follow when I'm doing my quilting, but they don't show up very well just looking at the quilt, so that if ever that happens and they do come back, they really won't be noticeable. I've laid the 3 quilt pieces out, and this is how you do it. On the bottom is the backing. I don't know if you can tell, but I've got this laid on a bed. This is just in my spare bedroom, and if it's not a very big quilt, this is a really good spot for me to do this. The quilt itself is old, so if I stick pins in it, it doesn't really matter. So at the bottom is my backing. It's laid with the right side facing down on the bed. When I laid it out, I pulled and smoothed and made sure there was no creases, and I actually ironed it as well before I started spreading it on here. The next layer is the batting. Again, I smoothed it all out before I put it on here. And those both need to be a little bit bigger than your quilt top. When I've put all this together, there will be a little border around the edge that later will be cut off, but I always leave that in place. It just helps to hold everything together while you're doing the quilting. And then on the top, my actual quilt top. Now that I've got those laid out there, I have to pin them together. So for safety pins, you can get these curved, like that there, so you can see it. Curved safety pins, but these are actually a larger size than I like to use. There is a smaller size, and I like these better because they don't make such big marks in your fabric. And then what I do is I start in the center, and I actually just stab these in to hold it in place. I put them probably about 8 inches apart in rows. I've put a few in just to show you. I haven't actually got all the pins in yet, but once I've got the whole quilt anchored like this, then I just start at the edge and I go along and I just close the pins. So there are tools that you can buy that help you close them. I've seen people just using a teaspoon. If you do it this way, you can actually lift up the edge of the quilt to do it. And once this whole row, the pins are closed, then I can move the quilt and do the next row. So it makes it a lot easier doing it that way. Now, you couldn't really do this if you were on a table. I am really only able to do this because I'm on this old quilt that doesn't matter. If I was on a table, then I'd have to be a lot more careful about how I was pinning. After this, the next thing you can do if you want to is tack or baste. Do a large stitch across the quilt so that you can take the pins out and it's held in place anyway. I don't do that anymore. Mostly I just use the safety pins now. The next thing I'm going to do on this one is finish pinning it, and then I'm going to put it in a hoop ready to hand quilt. If you were going to machine this quilt, really this part of the process would be the same. You would just put all your pins in, then baste it again or tack it if you want to, and just carry it to the sewing machine and start your machine quilting. But I want to hand quilt this one. My pins are all in. Before I start quilting, there's just a couple of things that I want to check. One is I'm just going to look all around the edges of this quilt and make sure that the backing goes out further than the top. it's just really easy to move things around so that the backing is too short when you get to the end. But I've checked all the way around this, and there's a little bit. It's enough, it's going to be covered. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the quilt over, and I'm just going to inspect the back really. And what I'm looking for here is to make sure that I haven't actually pinned any creases in this. So make sure it's all nice and smooth. And I can see that that is. It's a bit crumpled just from turning it over, but yeah. All that's good and smooth, and it won't be a problem when I quilt it. So, all right, so now I'm ready to put the hoop onto it. Now I'm going to start quilting in the middle. So I'm going to put this part of the hoop underneath. When I put this on, I want to avoid the safety pins. I don't want to try and be pressing my hoop over where there are any safety pins in there. If I look and I see that there's some in the way, then I might just take that one out. I'm going to take that one out. The hoop will hold it in place anyway. In fact, once I've put this on, I could just take these safety pins completely out of the middle. Fold a bit more. And this just presses over here. There we go, and then I'm just going to tighten this up, and that's ready. All right. To quilt, you need some quilting cotton, some needles, especially for quilting, which are usually called betweens, a regular thimble, and just a pair of scissors for snipping your thread. I'm going to do white on this. I would like to have done a pale blue colour or something, but because I've got sashiko on this white section here, if I do it in white, then it won't disturb the patterning of my sashiko. It'll just disappear behind it, and it won't be a problem. Whereas if I put a blue or a darker colour, then it would dissect the lines and kind of spoil the effect of it. This quilting cotton, it is a little bit different. It's got some kind of a coating over the thread that makes it a little bit stiffer. It also makes it much easier to thread. I have a lot of problem threading needles. But even though this is a really small needle and a really small eye, the thread is so stiff that it just goes through there quite easily. I don't even need a needle threader. The way I like to do this is I like to have it all prepared, and then at night when I'm watching TV, I just sit down with this on my knee, and I like to have something to do. I decided it was easier to make a little mock-up here of a quilt in a frame than actually to show you how to start and finish on the quilt itself. I've picked a dark material so you can see the thread and you can see what I'm doing better. I've drawn a line on here as though that was my quilting line. I've tied a knot in my thread. I'm going to put my thimble on. And the way you would do this is, when you're beginning, you would put your needle in, not quite on the line, maybe an inch or so away. You don't go through the back of the fabric, you're threading it in between the layers, and then come up on the line. Pull it through, and that little knot will pull through and just embed in the batting, and that's how you start off. Then you're going to do your quilting stitch. So this is a rocking motion. You're going to do small stitches in and out, pushing them through with your needle, just 2 or 3 stitches at a time. Follow your line all the way along, or whatever pattern it is that you've drawn on your fabric. And then when you get to the end of the line, the way you finish off is really similar to the way you begin. You're going to tie a knot. You don't want it to be quite at the end. Probably about there. So this may be a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch there to my knot. Then again, I'm going to put it in on the line as though I was doing the next stitch. not through the back, thread it between the layers, come out over here and pull it through, and then you hear the little pop as it goes in there, and cut your thread off. 2 hints I would say is, don't go too close to your hoop to finish off your stitching. If your needle is too close, it's real hard to get it out to finish off your line. And the other thing is, when you get to the end of your row, don't leave your thread too short. You need quite a length of thread to be able to tie your knot in it, otherwise you'll struggle to tie the knot to finish off. So you want to leave yourself a little bit, maybe 6 inches of thread. So I hope you can see that better on this dark fabric with the light cotton. This is where I would now pin my needle in, go to the next row and do that. Okay, that's really all there is to it. I'm going to do the next rows, and I'll show you when it's all finished. This is what happens whenever I lay my work down to change the hoop or do any little adjustment. This is Jess spread out on my quilt. My hand quilting is all done on this quilt now. I think it came out fine. You can see the diamond pattern on there, and in a minute I'll move closer up where you can see a little bit of the stitching. So if this has been useful and you think that you might hand quilt something like this, please like and subscribe. When I look at this now, if I wanted to, I could do more hand quilting to it. I could go into each little square and do a little pattern if I wanted, and I'm thinking that I might do that actually. All I have to do now is trim the edges off where that batting is still showing and put a binding on it. And I will make a video on how to do binding. There are several ways, and if you keep watching for that, I will show you how to do some good ways to do that. So I hope this isn't too shaky. I'm going to walk closer to the quilt, hoping that you can actually see some of the stitching. It's a cute little quilt, and it was a lot of fun to do. The sashiko on it and the hand quilting.